Welcome to my show, The Whistleblower with Mychal Wilson. This show examines the nonpartisan issue of fraud, waste, and abuse, in which sometimes is at the expense of the American taxpayer. I wanted to create a show to give you an insider's view into the risky, secretive, and potential lucrative world known as whistleblowing. This is a show which explores the courage and integrity within us, and in some cases, the potentially lucrative, incentivized integrity for those Davids fighting those Goliaths, the little man fighting the big man, the little woman fighting the big woman, and for those who simply want to bring about justice and help others. So to start this show off, I would like to introduce my first guest, who is appearing live in studio, Mr. Charles Langley, who is Executive Director of Public Watchdog, and who also worked for the Utility Consumers Actions Network and was subsequently terminated or resigned from that network. Yeah. So great to have you on the show, Charles.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I was constructively terminated, which, as you know, is a legal term, which means it made it impossible for me to do my job.
Okay, and constructively, what do you mean in terms of you were cut salary, you were collecting unemployment, or did the company go bankrupt and you had to resign, or?
They couldn't fire me, so they said, look, we're going to reduce your wages to X, and X was not enough to even pay my gas and groceries and things like that.
Right, a way to squeeze you out of there.
Right.
So in the process, so what is it that you blew the whistle on? Why did they want to terminate you and squeeze you out? And why did they retaliate against you?
Well, I started at UCAN, the Utility Consumers Action Network, in 1996. And for years, I actually handled their communications. And we were saying, look, we're lowering SDG&E, San Diego Gas and Electric's utility rates. We're fighting hard. We're doing our best. And after about 14 years of doing that, I actually started looking at the rates, and I discovered that San Diego Gas and Electric's rates were the highest in the nation, with the exception of one utility in Alaska.
Okay, and why is that? Well, why were the rates so high?
Well, I believe it was because groups like UCAN were legitimizing the rate-making process at the California Public Utilities Commission, which sets rates in the state of California. Most states have a Public Utilities Commission. Right. And what happened was that process of outside interveners supposedly fighting utilities in an administrative court of law became kind of a charade, like a kabuki dance, where basically we would show up as interveners, we'd fight like heck, and then we'd get paid off. And the game kind of worked like this. Well,
let me ask you a question in terms of
yeah.
So where, in terms of the scheme of things and the fraud and everything, who was profiting from this, or what is it that led you to stick up for the people?
Yeah, well, the utilities were definitely profiting from it. And what troubled me was I started looking at the books, at UCAN's books, and I noticed what appeared to be incidents of basically embezzling, improper bonuses, potentially unlawful bonuses given to the executive director. And then finally there was just a $1 million pass-through that really looked like money laundering to me.
So when you say the executive director, were other board members involved here, or was it just the executive director?
No, this was an executive director who was very charismatic, very much trusted by his board of directors, and the board of directors pretty much let him do whatever he wanted to do.
And so when confronted, what was his argument, his defense, saying I wasn't embezzling, or was he saying, there's a bonus, a legitimate bonus by the company?
Exactly. He said everything's above board, and these secret bonuses, and they've all been discussed. It was all decided many, many years ago. And what we did was, when we complained to the board, I wasn't the only whistleblower. There was actually a young attorney on staff who really took this on.
And what was his name?
His name was David Peffer.
Okay.
And when David wrote a 2-page letter to the board of directors with 7 different items on it saying, look, you need to investigate. So this was an attorney telling a staff attorney telling the board, you've got to watch out.
So for an internal investigation.
Right.
So I can only imagine what happened with that. So was that memo filed in the trash can, or did they actually do an internal investigation?
Oh, they freaked out, because then what happened was the board thought, wait a minute, we're liable. You know, at a nonprofit, the board of directors is there to ensure the financial integrity of the organization.
Right.
So here we have activity that looks unseemly. And so what they did was they hired an attorney to investigate. But what that attorney was essentially not an investigator, but he was a defender of the board of directors.
Exactly,
that was his client.
So, and then what happened in terms of, was there ever any type of indictment of the executive director or of the board itself? I mean, was there a lawsuit filed?
When I realized that the investigation by this attorney was a sham, that it was actually a cover-up instead of an investigation, I took my complaints and David's complaints and took them to the FBI.
Okay.
They investigated. They announced an investigation. It was front page news. And then UCAN decided to basically declare bankruptcy 1 day later. It took them 24 hours. Then we got engaged in a battle to try and save the organization, because what we wanted to do was perpetuate UCAN's good work. We just wanted to get rid of this questionable situation with bonuses.
And so what was the end result there? In terms of, they filed for bankruptcy, did anyone ever go to jail? Was, you know, are these still just allegations? Basically, were the allegations ever proved in a court of law?
Never.
Okay.
The FBI investigation was closed about a year ago. And what happened, though, was that the executive director was forced out. We went through a series of 4 different executive directors, several of whom quit. When they looked at the books, they said they felt that the board of directors was compelling them to legitimize basically an unlawful accounting and
business practices.
Business practice. So finally, they got one last executive director who came in. At that point, the organization had been nearly bankrupted.
Right.
The new executive director was making less than me. He was an attorney. He was hired for $45,000 a year. I think I was making $65,000 a year. And they said, "I'm sorry, we just can't afford to keep you on. You know, we're going to have to cut your pay in half." And that's what I mean by constructive termination. But the reality was, they were rapidly running out of money. Fortunately, UCAN still survives, but I think that as an advocacy group, it lacks the kind of ferocious intent that I'd like to see in a public advocacy group, which is why I started Public Watchdogs.
Okay. So let me back up here then. So after you filed a letter, the attorney, you guys sent a letter, there was an internal investigation. I'm sure everything was pretty much concealed. That's how these things usually go. Did you ever file a lawsuit against the company, against UCAN, for any type of retaliation or constructive wrongful termination against them?
No, we didn't.
Okay.
We got help from the former city attorney for San Diego, pro bono help, very generous, simply to preserve the integrity of the organization and to restore its integrity. And that really didn't happen. We were successful in replacing the entire board of directors, but it was such a back and forth, difficult issue, going up against a multi-million-dollar law firm with an attorney that was working pro bono. And eventually, the money runs out, even when it's free. And we couldn't ask Mike to go ahead and fund another costly lawsuit.
So I find your story very compelling, because some whistleblowers blow the whistle because they see a potential risk, but a large, reward at the end of the rainbow. Yours is just based on the ethics of the company and making the company a better place, and to help the public out. Correct?
Right. We weren't in it for the money. And this is what I tell whistleblowers who would like to continue in their careers.
You can look at tell them the camera right here, so everyone knows.
If you blow the whistle, it is the last job you'll ever have. And it's very few whistleblowers actually walk out whole with millions of dollars. Now, you might be publicly lauded as a hero, But one of the more frustrating things that happened to me was I was involuntarily outed as a whistleblower.
Right.
It became a scorched earth campaign.
And that's what happens, yeah.
Yeah, so, but I remember I was at a panel and a guy came up and said, "You're just great, you took down Mr. X." And I said, "Yeah, and I'm losing my house." And he kind of waved his hand and he made this like farting noise with his mouth and waved his hand and walked away and said, "You're a hero."
Yeah.
And, being a hero doesn't pay the rent.
Correct. Now I want you to hold that thought. We'll be right back, but I want you to hold that thought because I have a little different perspective from my own experience. Right. But I want you to hold that thought. We'll be right back. Thank you. We'll be right back. We'll have some more insider information from Charles Langley. I'm Mychal Wilson, your show host, and we have Charles Langley here, and we'll see you in a second. Welcome back to The Whistleblower. This show explores the courage and integrity within us, and in some cases, the potentially lucrative incentivized integrity for those Davids fighting those Goliaths. I'm your show host, Mychal Wilson, and I'm appearing live in studio with Charles Langley, who's the Executive Director of Public Watchdogs. Now, Charles, before we took a break, you had said to people in the audience, it's the last job you'll ever get. And I disagree because I have represented whistleblowers under the False Claims Act who blew the whistle for device fraud, against Medtronic, against Biotronic. These cases settled for $23.5 million. One was for $4.9 million. I myself, I'm an attorney. I was once a whistleblower, and my former employer who terminated me settled with the DOJ for $515 million. So I have seen people who take the proper legal course benefit from blowing the whistle. I've also seen others who been able to get other jobs as well. Maybe they do suffer some blacklisting and retaliation, but I just bring it up because to my audience, I wouldn't discourage you from blowing the whistle if it's a sense of integrity involved there. Money is always second, but never say it's not about the money, because if you ever have an interview with the FBI or DOJ, they'll ask you, so why'd you blow the whistle? And if you say, well, it's not really about the money, when it comes time to receive that award and you ask for a large relator share, they're going to say, well, you said in that first meeting that it wasn't about the money. Yeah. So, but you have to have a sense of a moral compass within you, I believe, and a sense of integrity when you blow the whistle. Now, I find your story interesting because you didn't profit and you're still out there fighting, and now you have a group called Public Watchdogs. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
And what does this group do?
Well, one of the things we do is encourage whistleblowers. Mm-hmm. And in instances where they're with an agency where there isn't always a big payday, as you know. Yeah. I don't want to discourage people from blowing the whistle. We are totally pro whistleblower. We want people to blow the whistle. Sometimes the wisest thing, if all you're going to get out of it is reform and a pat on the back, is to remain anonymous. So we encourage anonymous whistleblowing. And then if it's a strong case, of course, then we'd want to go public. Now, what Public Watchdogs, right now, our sole focus is on our attempts to reform the California Public Utilities Commission, and more importantly, to remove the nuclear waste that's being deposited on the beach at San Onofre. It's a tremendously unsafe situation, and it's
let's back up. So this is the beach where I see, tons. It's a great surfing spot, right?
It is. The American surfing started at San Onofre.
Okay. And are these actually surfers, the people, the beachgoers, the public, are they at risk? If you walk with a Geiger counter on the beach, is it going to zzz, or is it hardly noticeable at all?
Actually, I'm holding a Geiger counter right here. And the last time I was on the beach...
Can I see that?
Yes. And that's a mobile Geiger counter. It's a prototype. We're working on getting solar-powered Geiger counters that we can deploy all around San Diego and Orange County so that the public has instant access to radiation readings from San Onofre or even other sources.
Right. And so, getting a little deeper into that, so these containers, these fuel rods, which are solid, right? They aren't liquid.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? They're sitting there, are they encased in concrete?
What they are
if you walk down the beach, can you actually see the sarcophagus or whatever it's...
No, a fuel rod is about 18 to 20 feet high, and its dimensions are very close to these structures that you use in the studio here, like right behind you to hold up the lights. But they can weigh 30 or 40,000 pounds because plutonium and uranium are
heavy metals.
Very heavy, 6 times heavier than gold for plutonium. So you've got these very heavy spent fuel assemblies. And it's sort of like when you burn coal to make a barbecue, imagine if that barbecue remained radioactively hot for 250,000 years. Now this is a problem. Nobody can get anywhere near these things without dying immediately.
But are they I mean, if you're walking along the beach, are you seeing, like, what are you seeing? Like a concrete structure with the rods inside? What you're going to see
is it looks like a massive concrete parking lot with 6 foot by 6 foot squares of concrete about this thick on top of it. Each one of those squares is covering a silo, and inside that silo there will be a large can measuring about 20 feet by 5 feet filled with nuclear waste. And each can contains more radiation than what was released at Chernobyl.
Wow.
What troubles us is these cans are only guaranteed for 25 years by the manufacturer. They are thinner than a dime on the walls. They are stainless steel, 5/8 of an inch thick, and they're subject to cracking, and stainless steel is subject to corrosion. And what's so absurd and obscene about this whole effort is these cans are literally resting a couple of feet above the saltwater table, 108 feet from the surf on the beach. There couldn't be a worse possible location.
Well, that was my next question here was, if they're that close to the water, I mean, have they done water testing to see if the radioactive levels are higher there? I mean, if you took that Geiger counter and went in the water, will that go off?
They are required to report every 90 days. Now, this is what's interesting. It's very difficult to check for radiation underwater. Water is an incredible barrier. 3 feet of water will stop 98 to 99% of the ionizing radiation coming out of a nuclear power plant. That 1% that gets through will still kill you. But
okay. So
they dilute the water that the spent fuel rods are stored in now, and they flush it out into the ocean. They call it dilute and discharge.
So when there was the meltdown in Japan, everyone was worried about, the radiation coming over. Then people were worried. You see these images of like 3-eyed fish and all this weird stuff. If I went fishing, I go fishing. So if I'm going off the coast of San Onofre and I'm catching like yellowtail or yellowfin, tuna that's maybe there, is it a possibility that I'm going to catch some fish that are going to be polluted by the radiation?
Yeah, absolutely. If they're diluting the pools that day and they're swung by the outflow tube, yeah, you might get a dose.
And so why isn't someone doing something about this? Why is it Con Ed, or who's the
It's Southern California Edison.
Yeah. So Southern California Edison is a money issue for the actual cleanup. It's too expensive to actually clean it up, so they just put the rods there.
They've put it in the cheapest place they possibly can. And part of this is the failure of the U.S. government, the Department of Energy, which is tasked with creating a permanent nuclear repository for all of these nuclear reactors. And there was one called Yucca Mountain that looked like a fairly good solution for the short term, meaning 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And it got terminated because the people of Nevada didn't want a high-level nuclear waste dump in their backyard.
Right. I mean, and it seems like the rods, if they're 30 to 40,000 pounds, and there's all these rods, it's pretty hard to transport them anyway. Is that correct, or?
It is. They have to move these cans very, very carefully. I mean, if one of them dropped, we did an analysis in proportional mathematics, and if you took one of these big cans, they look like a soup can, and dropped it down to the size of an egg, that egg would have a shell on it that would be eggshell thin. It would be a stainless steel shell, but it would be and the egg would probably weigh somewhere between 5 and 13 pounds, depending on the type of fuel inside the egg. So you've got something very heavy and what is the most deadly substance on Earth in a very fragile container.
Now, as you were retaliated against for UCAN and with your new group, do you face any retaliation now or harassment for, looking out for the public on, regarding the San Onofre matter?
Well, not that I know of. We've worked with whistleblowers who have been terminated, and it's very unfortunate. And our biggest problem is just moving the issue forward, keeping it fresh in the media. And we've got a federal lawsuit to remove the waste.
Oh, that's
we have
great.
more lawsuits that we'd like to get underway.
Is there a name of the federal lawsuit? If people are interested in it, they can look
They
it up?
can go to our website at publicwatchdogs.org and click on the resources section.
Okay, and that's up there with the
they'll get the
lawsuit.
lawsuit. Yeah.
Okay. And so, is there other work you're doing out there right now besides the San Onofre? Are there big cases or big, issues that the public should know about?
At this time, we're such a small organization, we're just focused exclusively on nuclear waste. We hope in the future that we'll get involved in other rate setting issues. We're involved in terms of the rate setting. We believe that the rates that were set relevant to San Onofre, where we're all paying for these rate increases, were unlawful, unethical, and possibly even criminal, and we're pursuing that at the California Public Utilities Commission.
Okay, great. And so we're going to wrap up the show here, Charles. I'd love to have you back on to update some other things, update the San Onofre matter, but how can people reach out to you and get in touch with you, especially whistleblowers out there?
Well, we're very available. You can go to our website, click on the contact section, and our phone number's there, my email is there, and we respond. We always reply to everything.
Great. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Charles. Well, thank you for your time and honest opinion, Charles. And, for everyone out there in the audience, thank you for watching the show. This is The Whistleblower with Mychal Wilson, and it's available every Tuesday at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific, and on demand on Roku and Amazon, and coming soon to Dish TV. Thank you, and have a great evening.